Today we will be speaking with Orlin Francis for the Belizean Legends feature. This feature is our Scholar of the Week feature, and Orlin Francis appeared on Belizean Legends about a month ago. And he also had an article, a very scholastic article that was published in the Mandela newspaper in Belize that received a lot of high acclaim. Orlin Francis, I want to welcome you to Belizean Legends.
Thank you for having me.
And you're no stranger to our show or documentary series. The only thing is that this is the first time that we are interviewing you for Belizean Legends for the documentary series, for the video feature. We published a very excellent article on your life and what you intended to be and what you wanted to be as a young man coming up in this world today. You grew up right here in South Central Los Angeles. How did you do it? I mean, how can a young black youth come out of South Central Los Angeles where there's a lot of challenges?
Right.
How do you get it done? Because being an educator myself, a lot of the students are like, school sucks, I don't want to really go anywhere else.
Right.
How did you do it?
So to be quite honest, I think the one thing that separated my peers growing up and myself was an emphasis on academics and education that was sort of encouraged by my parents. So I had a family nucleus that was very dedicated to the idea of us succeeding. And you know, the dreams that I had growing up of wanting to be a lawyer and wanting to be an attorney or a judge or whatever it may be, they were reinforced by my family. And you know, whereas these were ideas that were completely ignored or destroyed for other children, I was taught that, you know, I could do whatever I wanted to do as long as I committed to it. And having that attitude allowed me to capitalize on opportunities that got me where I am today.
Yeah. You did what a lot of young black and Latino young people find very impossible. They find it very difficult. The challenges, the peer pressures, the coming through the academics, the going home, putting in work, going to the library, doing what is to be done. And only a few students or few people who have come out of these, what they would call so-called ghetto neighborhoods, from Southside Chicago to Harlem, New York, to Gary, Indiana, to South Central Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., where you are right now, right?
I'm in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Cambridge, Massachusetts, right? Yeah. Boston side. Each one of these cities, these big cities, have challenging neighborhoods, predator societies.
Absolutely.
You, from reading your piece that you wrote that draw attention to your story, is that you actually volunteered to help women who are battered.
Right.
Tell us about that.
Right. So, as I mentioned, my family was a huge part of the reason I was successful. I attribute a lot of my success to the way that we were raised and the importance that was on academics. And like I mentioned, I realized that a lot of the people that I grew up around lacked that, especially ones from my community. So I wanted to figure out some way I could tangibly solve the issue that I saw in front of me. Right? I wanted to create that bridge for those families or those kids that wanted to succeed, knew that they could succeed, but didn't have the necessary reinforcing and the necessary support to do those things. So I wanted to delve into an issue that, you know, I could repair that gap. And it was actually crazy how it happened. So I started volunteering at a center, you know, not entirely aware of what I was getting myself into. All I knew was that a lot of the women at the shelters that I had been volunteering at were afraid of black men. And for me, as a black male, I worried that that family unit could never exist in the way that it needed to be as supportive as it was for me. So I wanted to step in and I wanted to repair that relationship between people or survivors of color from these shelters with male figures in their lives of color. And that's how I saw I could just better my surroundings in general.
The renowned Afrocentric scholar Dr. Cress Wilson, she passed away just about 2 days ago, and as you spoke just now, she was the architect of a theory called Black Genetic Annihilation. And you might not be too familiar with her work, but she was a psychiatrist. So she was a psychiatrist, and she came up with this theory that says that young black men, if they never had a father figure in the home, they have never felt what it's like for a man to hold their hands, will sooner or later fall through the cracks in society. And that was one of the main reasons why there was these problems with young black males. As you mentioned, a lot of these women, it's not only the young black men, but also from your working with these women is also black women who have not known what it's like to have a father figure in their home and what it's like to have a dad holding his hands.
Absolutely.
And these things, they play out. They play out later on, as you were saying, right?
I completely agree. So a lot of the work that I do now is centered on, redefining conceptions of masculinity both for young black boys themselves and men themselves, but for the women as well, right? Because I think even to the extent that men go through these problems and once struggle to succeed and have these obstacles, as black women also have to struggle in terms of finding relationships and trusting men and these sorts of things. So it's twofold, right? It affects both genders, and I think it's important for that sort of synthesis in a way, like those two groups being able to coexist and successfully coexist, would help restructure families in communities like this, and consequently have an effect on children and allow children to be able to live normal lives that they otherwise can, and they otherwise aren't able to be a regular kid and have opportunities that regular kids have.
My wife, being a social worker, she worked with a group of young people who have apartments that the county pays for. And they were children in foster care.
Right.
They came out of foster care. So I asked her, I says, why you have to go do case study on them? He says, they were in foster care, and 90% of the studies show that they will fall through the cracks if they don't have support to live normal, decent lives. Talk about that. What is really happening there?
Right. So it's tough, right? Because there's approximately 45,000 foster kids in the system as it is in Los Angeles today, right? And in those numbers there's a heavy percentage of them that are minorities and people of color specifically. And even the families that they are going to, if they are able to get to those spaces, are people that just want their check. They want the grant that they receive for that child, and that is how they are, living their own lives and providing for themselves. Again, that furthers my want to help create legitimate family structures, right? I think that's so important.
Very much.
Because it's not as simple as saying, okay, you place somebody in somebody's life and you have them assume a parental figure for them. That person has to want to engage with their children. That person has to be, somebody that is understanding of love and wants to give that love to somebody else. And I think the male and female, like both parents, the mother and father figures, in these families play a very key role, regardless of the gender of the child, right? You learn how to appreciate women through your mother. You learn how to be strong or love as a man through your father. So it's so key to have and also create ways where these families can thrive. And when they're not, it makes sense why we're dealing with as many issues as we are. Mind you, none of these solutions exist in a vacuum, right? So my being able to handle issues as they relate to domestic violence and gender and sexual assault and all of those sorts of things, that's one vacuum that we handle all of these myriad of issues in. The beauty of going to, I think, an institution like the one I go to now is that, I can invest all of my time into that issue. And I can trust, because I see people every day that are invested in other issues that I also care about but don't have the time to invest in, handle those issues, right? So it's no singular person is going to be able to solve all of these issues. But us as a collective, we're having these conversations, we're engaging with one another, we're making sure that at the end of the day, the things that we see as being important and things that we see attributed to our success growing up are things that we are able to improve for others as we pay it forward.
You have carved out a very constructive direction in terms of where you want to go, and it's so needed in the Black community and in the community, the underserved communities.
Absolutely.
I had some time to spend at Charles Drew one year working with medical students, and you hear a lot of that. When my job was to make sure I get their profiles, publish a magazine, interview them, and a lot of these young women, they were talking about rape, they were talking about, and they didn't want to say it, they didn't want to talk about it, and they were like, you know what, can I tell you this? And we had this orientation in the Drew, King Drew, and you hear these, you realize, you say, wow. But there go psychologists and psychiatrists who says, hey, you know what? Your life, everybody has some troubling and challenging times in your life. It's not the end. You can continue with this. But what can you tell someone that? What can you tell someone you can go on?
Right.
After they have been through all these things.
It's
I guess this is where you come in. Where people like you come in the center where you are volunteering.
Right. So, adversity is a very fascinating phenomenon, right?
Yeah.
You struggle day in and day out trying to figure out how to move forward, but there are definitely moments where you're tired, you're overwhelmed, you're frustrated. But I think and speaking specifically with regards to sexual assault or domestic violence and these sorts of things, you realize how simple of an impact your presence can have on a population or a demographic. I know for me personally, it was weird because I entered the space at high school, right? So I was a young Black male teenager, right? So when I realized that women were even fearful of me as a teenager, as a Black teenager at that sent off a ton of different things in my head, right? That meant that there were people that were my age, that looked like me, that were committing these acts as well. So at that point, I took it upon myself to say, now I have a reason to not only charge, people that are, in their 20s, whatever it may be, but people my own age, teenagers, to really get involved in the issue. And I saw that just inserting myself into those spaces allowed me to connect with these women and these children in a way that they had never been able to experience before. I didn't take that for granted, right? So now my focus is being able to introduce other male role models and help them understand that, you can love again, both as a, woman seeking a relationship and as a child seeking a father figure. And it's essential, like I said, just to be able to have that presence, it's as simple as going to a shelter, being in that space, them becoming familiar with your face, and then for that first time, it could take 2 weeks, it could take 3 weeks, it could take 2 months, it could take 3 months. Yeah. But that one point where they're able to relieve themselves of their barriers and have a conversation with you and open themselves up, that makes their process in moving forward so much easier.
Do you subscribe to the theory that it is architected, these sorts of dysfunctionalities that are inside Black and people of colors, neighborhoods and communities, that the theory that white supremacy is a sort of a weapon that the status quo uses to annihilate or obliterate or eliminate certain people of color from, that you hear a lot of mostly Afrocentric scholars, they speak about. Do you think that there is that these things comes from another cause? There is another root cause of these things?
Again, I think that's one. So I'm going to go around your question in a sort of way, right? But I think both are true in a lot of ways. I would attribute the latter problems, the problems that I think that may not be related to it, are still a direct consequence of those issues. So the idea of white supremacy and these sorts of things, like, you know, I really don't even like using the phrase at times, because I think it's a phrase that sometimes has been used as a cop-out and by conspiracy theorists, and it's had that label. But I still fully agree with the fact that there is absolutely a driving and underlying force in this country that serves to maintain the status quo as it exists. It's interesting because this is actually an issue that's very heavy at my school right now. And I think,
coupled with the present things you see happening on the university campuses,
right, exactly, nationwide, right? So, what I will say is that the change that's necessary oftentimes is assumed to be in this framework that currently exists, right? So, even my position as a law school student or a public policy student, I'm constantly trying, and I've grown up for the past several years assuming that I would be able to fix these laws and these policies under this framework that currently exists. What I think I've begun to understand and recognize now, whether it's through these police brutality cases or just even from extreme cases like police brutality instances, to my day-to-day experiences in class and what it means to be a black individual, a black male, at Harvard Law School specifically. There is definitely this wave and this heavy undertone of racial superiority, and even to the extent now where it's not even intentional. It's the theory of like implicit racial biases comes into play, right? So people have become so acclimated to certain things that it is now just a way of life, and we don't challenge it. We continue to operate under that framework because it's what we know to be really. And what I love about what's going on as of recent in our community is a challenging of that entire framework, right? So rather than assume that framework is static, we are now thinking about ways that we can take that framework, reconstruct it in its entirety, and then create some sort of quality. Now, is that going to immediately eliminate all the problems that we see? Not at all. The damage has been done to some extent, right? So the first step to making sure that we don't create any further problems is to redress that framework. But in terms of moving forward, like, there's a reason we still have to implement these policies. There's a reason we still have to tackle these things, because there's so many moving pieces to this solution. But in short, yeah, I would absolutely agree that it's a factor.
Then there is another theory that comes from out of even black scholars itself that says God will never change the condition for people until they change what is really bothering their hearts. That the black community has to start looking itself in the face and realize that they are partially responsible for the very state that they are in,
right.
And that until they change those things, starting with the family, the excessive partying, the leisure and pleasure, the spending out of the resources. Recently, the justice or else thing that Minister Louis Farrakhan had embarked on, calling the community to wake it up. He's saying that you are partially responsible for all these things.
Right.
We, black on black crime.
Right.
Black men raping black women.
Right.
you are responsible. You are now the only weapon against yourself.
Right.
But yet you want to blame all of your problems on white supremacy. So there is that other argument.
Right. So I'll speak to that because I've always found that argument really, fascinating, but not in a good way. It's relatively weak. Because whether it's black on black crime, first of all, that's a misnomer because crimes are done based on racial proximity or proximity, like cultural and community proximity, right? So the likelihood that a white person is going to kill a white person is higher than a white person killing a black person or a black person killing a white person. You know what I'm saying? So logically speaking, it only makes sense that a black person is good. So black on black crime is crime, And I think it's funny that we've even gotten used to that term or that label, black on black crime, because that in and of itself highlights to me a problem that's being created, not by us, that's used as an alternative argument. That's an argument that was created by white people in white spaces who were challenging why we were upset about certain behaviors. However, there was all this gang activity that's going on.
More conservative argument.
Exactly. And same holds true for sexual assault, rape, all of these things. But, to step back a bit, I think, it is important to highlight exactly how bias surfaces in communities. I think it's really important to think about the way that bias manifests itself in society, right? When people say black people need to look themselves in the faces and address that they have some issues in their own communities, that I think that's true of any race or any community or any culture, period. But what's problematic is that black behaviors, black things that, whether it's something as simple as dancing, something as simple as lyricism or rap or all of these things, right? They're other. They're sort of seen as black or culture, that's part of that culture. It's commodified. It's like they found ways to make money from these things, but in actuality, these are never going to be the tenets of American society, right? Like it's always going to be this thing that is it's glamorous, but it's not what you want your permanent state to be in, right? Yeah. And unfortunately, we benefit negatively from that because we end up doing stupid things like spending a lot of money on things that don't really matter, right? But it's because that's what's commodified from the other end, because at the end of the day, they know that that's never going to be what they truly adopt as a part of their culture. And a simple example is this, right? I remember, being in conversations with people, like really ignorant people that would be like, oh, black people have their own station on television. Black people have their own month, right? And you for some people it's like, okay, like I hear what you're saying, like, that makes sense, yada yada. But you take a step back and you think about the fact that you even have to be in a situation where you have a month labeled Black History Month. You have a channel labeled Black Entertainment. When every other channel has no distinguishing characteristic with regard to race, right? There's no Black ABC. There's no, like ABC is, but when you understand that, you assume and you presume that is a channel made specifically for a white person. So does that make January, March, April, May, and through December, does that make them, are those white months? Am I supposed to assume that? So these are all things that, we want to acknowledge, we want to address. We don't want to give too much credit to them, don't get me wrong, but I think it's important that we acknowledge the ways that these racial biases are present.
Yes.
And even the most well-intentioned people, white or black, oftentimes, the other argument is, right, is that there's a political correctness argument. There's an argument that individuals should, if they can't expect things to change in America, so we just have to adapt, and we have to do what's appropriate for us to fit in and just accept it, whether that means wearing a suit, buttoning up a tie, or tying up a tie, doing whatever you have to do. So I want to make it clear, right? This is it's not as simple as saying pull up your bootstraps, and people. First of all, the first thing you want to acknowledge is the fact that people aren't wearing the same size boots. Yeah. Right? That's the fact of the matter. So pulling them up sometimes isn't going to do a damn thing, really. Let's just be frank about it. with that, I want to make it very clear. I consider myself more lucky than anything else. I was blessed not only with a family structure. I was not only blessed with opportunities. I was not only blessed with being at the right place at the right time, but I was blessed in a myriad of ways, right? So do I look back and think that it was solely my hard work that got me where it was? Not at all. And I would not even want to sell somebody that dream, right? Because I could have easily went to one of these LAUSD public high schools. I could have easily been distracted, like a lot of my peers ended up being, and fell into anything.